Hi, welcome back everyone to another discussion between Peter Engel and myself, Mihai Algiu. You'll see here a playlist with many, over 30 or 40 episodes of where we are going in depth, explaining theoretically, but also experientially from experientially core concepts, ideas connected to the fourth way system, non-duality, and it's about awakening, the system of awakening, conscious evolution in everyday life, 21st century. So we have touched on many important topics. So any fourth way lovers or lovers of Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, it's a rich resource there. But we got to a point where we want to tackle a big topic, feel certain weight of that. So we had the subject on cosmology maybe a few months ago, cosmology, the bigger picture, and we touched on that. In the fourth way, I mean, cosmology is like the bigger picture slash the truth of reality, how the universe operates slash God, consciousness, reality, the Tao. And in the fourth way, as it came to us, in the area of cosmology, we studied the law of three, the law of seven, the various laws and ways of looking at a creation. Yeah. But today we wanted to somehow we wanted to tackle this subject, and it may become a very short one, or it may become several talks where Peter and myself want to tackle this idea more like of God, to discuss God in relation to the fourth way, in relation to self-remembering, in relation to all the work we are doing. Also, it is said in the fourth way, or connoisseurs, lovers of the fourth way, and Gurdjieff would say that the fourth way is some esoteric Christianity. I do want to go into this at some point. And there was a strong connection between Gurdjieff and Greek Orthodox tradition, the Philokalia fathers, and I myself happen to be Greek Orthodox, baptized as a kid, but I do have a heart and mind interest in these teachings, and I have seen how some of these ancient texts written 1800 years ago by monks in the desert, they could be just put aside while we are talking now, and it's kind of the same work. It's just in religious terminology. We want to go into looking at some core scriptures, but from a different point of view, tackle ideas like esoteric and exoteric understanding. So this is what we are planning to do. So we shall start. What I want just to say before I give it to you, Peter, is that what is interesting and it was very useful for me as a practitioner and seeker is that when I encountered the teaching, Gurdjieff wasn't talking about God. He wasn't talking about this. Somehow he would say that he will talk about that there is C influence, conscious influence, but there was somehow the word God almost doesn't exist at all in the fourth way. So it's, I mean, I'm not 100% sure if what I said is true, but it is not something that we refer to as God in the same way. There are other terms as the absolute, his endlessness, the ray of creation, conscious influence, celestial influence. These are terms connected to it. And for me, that was extremely useful because, and I could see that I have a sense that Gurdjieff understood that people have a different notions of God. People understand God at their own level of consciousness and understanding. And also it's such a charged word, and it's so charged with so much programming and distortion and ignorance, basically, that he almost wanted to have this system somehow, at least in the early stages, not to go there in order to, for a certain positive effect. Anyway, so this idea that we are going to talk about, that anything in the fourth way, Gurdjieff was talking about that concepts like the truth, love, hope, friendship, sex, God, religion. They don't mean the same thing. So they mean something different depending on where we are at. And in the fourth way, as well as in other teaching, there is this scale of consciousness, different levels of spiritual development or consciousness awakening. Man or woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different levels. And so therefore sex or God or religion is like religion number 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's why we cannot just talk about God with everybody the same way. It will be we talk about very different things. Yeah, so maybe I'll stop here, and if you have anything on that, Peter, but especially you were mentioning just before we launched this that in the fourth way there's this idea of scale and relativity, and if you can speak about that and somehow your understanding on this topic, whatever you want to launch us with.
Thank you. Yes, I was implying by that, it's an encapsulation of what you were saying, that there are different worlds, there are different dimensions, there are different levels of being, and the same idea or concept or truth is understood differently on these different scales. And so that we cannot just, and we will go into this in more detail to make it more clear, but that's the general principle: is the word truth, the word God, the word love, the word self. All of these words have different meanings on different levels and in relation to different levels of consciousness. And my understanding is one reason why, there were several, I believe, but one key reason Gurdjieff didn't use this word very much is because he knew that to really understand what this word represents, God, that only consciousness itself in us can begin to glimpse and fathom the reality of this. At the same time, and also because the mind, our mind, as the fourth way says, our intellectual center, can only think God. It's always a concept for the mind. This is important to understand. God is never a reality for the mind. It's a concept. It's an idea. And this is why, look at the different religions of the world. They each have a slightly different concept of what God is, how God views man, how man should live his life according to the precepts of a good life in the eyes of God, what will happen after death in relation to God. All these things, they're different. And they're all concepts. They all may hint at some common truth, some common reality, but in essence, they're a concept. And even our emotional center you could say, can feel God rather than think God, but it's still feeling in a kind of emotional, conceptual way. Our emotions we experience as humans are not the deepest level of perception that we can experience or know. They're emotions. We don't even understand what emotions are. And so our mind can only think a concept of God. Our emotional center can only feel kind of a feeling of God, like a dear, warm God, a friend, a father, a mother, a lover. But it's always in human emotional terms that this is felt. It's only when consciousness itself begins to realize itself. Now we're talking about a very different dimension in us, a different dimension of truth, of reality, of perceptivity. And only then is there the beginning, really, of a realization of what this word God represents. Because one is beginning to touch on it. One has either, you could think of it, either stepped onto the shore of the truth of God, or one has dipped one's toe now in the ocean of God, depending on how you want to look at it. But only then does there begin to be a true taste of the reality of what this word implies. The same with the word Brahman. It's the same. People throw this word, I'm not saying everyone's casually throwing it around, but it's used in a way that the mind very easily clutches onto it, holds onto some concept of Brahman, and then operates from there, and it's far from comprehending the reality. Um, well, I think we can move around with this idea, looking at it from different points of view. We can certainly talk about it from the fourth way point of view. This idea there are men, there are levels of men number 1, 2, and 3 represent all human beings who aren't interested in esoteric spiritual ideas per se from the point of view of personal awakening. They may be interested in religion, but they're not. They're interested in their life, their health, their welfare, their survival, their legacy, their family, their reputation, and so on. How much they can accomplish and achieve and acquire in this life. Those are their interests. And then there's something called a man number 4. A man number 4 in the fourth way, according to the fourth way, is someone who begins to develop an interest in something higher, more spiritual, more ethereal, deeper internal, related to consciousness and awareness. And specifically then, according to the fourth way, a man number 4 is someone who begins to study in and learn from a school and is a product, ultimately is a product of a school and of school work. And a man number 5 represents someone in whom consciousness, awareness, has started realizing itself. This is beyond the body, beyond the mind, beyond the ego, beyond the sense of I. There's now a deeper, more expansive realization of being. And this is starting to flash and to stay on like a light bulb more often in someone. It's not the person, it's the consciousness in them has begun to awaken. You can use that word, to realize itself. And then a man number 6 is said to be someone in whom this has become more or less permanent. There's not just flashes, shorter flashes, maybe longer flashes. Now the light comes on and stays on. This awareness, this consciousness in the background, knowingly there in the background, aware as itself, watching you live your life, basically. And then man number 7 represents someone in whom this is even a more complete, more expansive, more all-embracing, wading now very deep. Now you're not just dipping your toe in the ocean, and you're not just out swimming at waist depth. You are now freestyle swimming in the ocean, to use that analogy. And in theory, there could be levels beyond that. Man number 8, man number 9. And this is now where you are you're deep into the ocean, let's call it. That's more theoretical, of course, though, for us, more conceptual. But so what we can talk about, I thought, is, for example, how do these different levels of being in us, at each level, for example, how does a man number 1, 2, or 3 view God? How does a man number 4 view the concept of God relative to the inner work they're doing? What about a man number 5 in whom consciousness is starting to realize itself? How is God viewed from that perspective? From now, not from the perspective of the mind only, but from the perspective of this awakening consciousness. And so on. What about a man number 6 in whom this is more permanent consciousness, more expansive, seeing deeper into the unknown, you could say? How would that consciousness view the reality of God? And how do these differ? And we can also talk about, Mihai, I thought about this morning. We can also ask the question, which I think few people do. How does God, let's suppose God as something, someone, a being, a beingness. How does God perceive man? Not only how does man perceive God, but how does God perceive man? This is very interesting. How does God perceive men number 1, 2, and 3? What does God see when God sees men number 1, 2, and 3? What does God see when God sees a man number 4 or woman number 4? What does God see when this God sees a man number 5? It sees someone in whom consciousness is beginning to self-realize, and so on.
Just hit me, there's some image of some kind of parental figure and with a bunch of kids. And some of them are really in a tantrum and in total kind of, they lost it and they are in total illusion and suffering, and then there's different children. Some are more like behaving and some are operating in a certain coherent way. And I don't know, it just came like this as you mentioned. How does God sees?
Well, this is another reason why Gurdjieff didn't want to introduce this idea, because he thought too many people view God as a parental figure and not as the source of the universe. Not only the source, but as the universe itself. This entire universe, or a series of universes, we don't know. Whatever it is, all as the theoretical body of God and mind of God. And then this all-embracing consciousness as this consciousness, God consciousness. And so that's much more than a parental figure. And this is another interesting thing. You could say that, for example, using the fourth way breakdown of men number 1, 2, and 3, people who are not interested in spirituality, who take God on a very superficial level as a parent or as a guardian, a protector, someone to be feared, someone I ask for help when I need something or want something or feel desperate, who can provide a magical cure to all my troubles, who, if I act properly, if I organize my behavior and my social mores a certain way, will be my friend and my father and my God and help me and do good to me and this kind of thing. Well, all of those are concepts of God as someone outside. God, I'm here, God is outside somewhere. And now I am establishing some kind of relationship to this God outside of me. And then similarly, even with, you could say, men number 4, who are starting to try to learn to think differently about this and about themselves and about their mind and their body, and to start to observe those more impartially, to kind of separate their consciousness from what it perceives. Now, this is an important thing that's starting to happen. Nevertheless, you could say that men number 4 also would continue to view God as something outside of them, as Oh God, I'm trying now to be more conscious. I'm trying to foster consciousness, awareness in myself. But God, I mean, God is all the consciousness. God is big and God is way out there. And I'm just this little person still trying to kind of imitate God and foster godness in myself. But there's still me, and then there's God out there who I'm trying to imitate or get closer to or approach or something like this. So these are concepts of God as something outside of us. Whereas when you reach the level of what's called a man number 5, now it's no longer just a mind churning about ideas and concepts of God, an emotional devotion and a gratitude and appreciation and sort of helplessness even, and all these things, human emotions. Now there begins to be a consciousness and a deeper awareness, pure awareness about this, about existence, the realization of being here, and not just being here in a room, but being here on this planet. We don't know this planet. What is this planet? Being here in this solar system. How often are we aware that we're in a solar system where what's going on, becoming conscious of there's a galaxy, there's an enormous, vast, there's a consciousness of this. This consciousness now begins to expand. And now this is when you hear people sometimes refer to the idea that God is within them. God is no longer something outside. God is in them. God is in you. Sometimes people say, you're not in God, God is in you. You're not in the world is in you. And so this marks quite a different shift in perspective, you could say. God is no longer out there. God is in here. God is in here. What does that mean? What's different about that view of God? This is all very interesting. And then it can go to the point where God is not outside of you and God is not inside of you. God is you. And you are God, meaning consciousness, not you, the person. I am God. No, that consciousness is the nature of God, of what God really is. And God is consciousness, comprises exactly the same consciousness that begins to self-realize within us. So now God has gone from being outside to being inside to being one. And then all of that can go away. There's no longer God is outside, God is inside. I'm in God, God is in me. There is just God. There's just being. There's just presence. There's no longer even a present moment. There's just presence and godness, you could say. And this is where this idea that God is everything, this is true union, true unity, non-duality is, duality is disposed of now. It disappears, it dissolves because nothing is separate now at all. Everything is one. And that right now, I mean, it's always right in front of us, oddly. It's always right in front of us. Everything is one. Everything is here. Everything is one. Feels separate to the mind, but in fact, it's all part of this one gargantuan, unfathomably large, expansive, multidimensional beingness of life, of existence. And it's all always right here. But we don't see it because we're usually shut up in our mind, in our concepts. And we may even have a concept of God and we go to church and we're going to, going to see the doctor, or we're going to have a test, or we're going to meet someone and we say a little prayer to God. In a way it's very sweet, but in a way it's very ignorant. That's just the mind talking to itself, oddly enough. And often prayer is just that for many people, and they don't know it. It's simply the mind talking to itself. It's one part of the mind talking to another part of the mind that entertains a concept of God. That's very different than the consciousness in us aligning itself with this bigger, deeper consciousness where, if God is everything and God is everywhere, and it's this God. See, again, it's hard to get. I think Ramana Maharshi said the idea of the concept of God is the last of the concepts to go, because the mind keeps thinking of it as something outside. Yes. And but this idea that this isness, let's call it, is everywhere and in everything. This is when you have true unity and true eternity, which means endless. We think of eternity having to do with time, and it does, but it also means endless. Isn't that interesting? That's why I think, didn't Gurdjieff call him his endlessness?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, I've said a lot there. Maybe that I'm sure that sparked some thoughts in you, Mihai. Maybe we can follow up, or you have some other ideas to bring in.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. It sparked a lot. Yeah, as you were sharing all of that, so I guess this would be the perspective or the revelation of the divine for sixth stage or number 6. But from this point of view, it's like Peter and Mihai and the audience on YouTube, it's basically it's God at talking to itself at different level of realization. But we have to struggle with, we have to struggle. I was just reading these meetings with Gurdjieff 1944, and somebody asked him, actually there was some little meeting with him and inspired me actually to do even a process. Somebody asked him, hey, I've been raised Catholic and I'm trying to be a good boy, but since I've been working with you and practicing self-remembering and the I am exercise, I feel that this is changing in me and I'm not sure about that Catholic or that God, and there's something special and interesting about this experience of the I am. Am I on the right track? Asking Gurdjieff. And Gurdjieff was like, yeah, you are on the right track. Keep going. And he got pretty strong, like, we inherit this. I guess in the perspective I mentioned before, where God is everything, I'm not objectifying myself. And I'm not objectifying God. Yeah, but in the setting of being unconscious or waking sleep, I'm objectifying myself. Consciousness objectifies oneself and others, and so then I'm in a world of I'm me, the body, or I'm me, the ego that seems to be solid. I'm me, and you are you, and God is out there. As Gurdjieff would say, it's like a old Jew far out there with a long beard with a comb in his pocket that is watching the whole thing and judging and deciding, and he was saying, no, that is an imagined God. Yeah, actually there was a French philosopher that said something like God created man in his own image, and conversely, and man created God in his own image.
Very nice.
So this God that is created in an ego's image, basically, that needs to be killed, Gurdjieff was saying. That one is a big obstacle on the revelation of the divine. So yeah, and it's interesting, he was encouraging to keep deepening into the I am without the words and keep going there, keep exploring there. So that's the way to have true glimpse of the divine, of the self, of the divine. So anyway, so that inspired me quite a bit. And actually, I will submit it here in the video. I created a process. It's almost like a God inquiry to kill the program, the man-made program of God, this idea of God we have that are infantile, and they are also a projection. They're a projection, what I have discovered on myself, on my own skin, so to say, on my mental skin and emotional skin, so to say, and on others, is that our relationship with our mommy and daddy in this life, they very much bleed on our attitude towards this man-made God. So depending of the emotional attitude or whatever happened with mommy and daddy, that's the attitude we'll have towards God, and towards the not the real towards God, whether it's real or not. So that's really a very important subject of inquiry. So I create a process to observe whatever our subconscious has about God, like a punishing God, or like if I'm a good boy, I'm going to get some candy, or is going to give me this, or anyway, in myself, I discovered a lot of this trust, rejection, removal, separate towards this concept of God, So somehow I found it helpful to explore this. These are like imprints, so they loosen up. So then I'm more open to be open, beginner's mind, and have more true revelation. But coming back to what we're saying, also the scale that you described, it's also in the man number one, the false personality, number one, two, and three, false personality and the false sense of me, the false sense of me is in charge and rampant. And in the man number four, the false sense of me, it's still rampant, but it is starting to be observed. It is being observed by consciousness, is being, self-observation is observing all of these patterns and this or that. So to me, it seems to the degree to which the self...
Yes, and we could even say, Mihai, if I may, I'll just interject here for a moment. This is important. Man number 1, 2, and 3, essentially, there's no consciousness observing. And what characterizes a man number 4 is now consciousness or awareness is beginning to gain enough focus to start actually observing oneself. And in the fourth way parlance, to observing the four centers at work, to watch the mind at work, to watch the emotions of rise and fall, to watch the bodily sensations, to watch the movements, all this. Now consciousness has enough, let's call it stability, to observe. And it's observing, observing, observing. Not always it lapses out of that often, but then when it comes back to what's called self-remembering, it's observing again. What distinguishes a man number 5 is now this observer, this awareness, this consciousness is beginning to realize itself as the source of this observing, this seeing. And so now consciousness starts to gain a different kind of stability, not only in its ability to observe and knowingly observe, but to know itself as the observing awareness, the witnessing, the seeing. Yes. So.
Yeah. So the degree to which, one knows oneself, the true self, seems to be the degree to which one knows God.
Something else you said made me realize there are all these different levels, as we're alluding to, which are different perceptions of how they're different, almost different forms of how we perceive what is called God from these different levels. And it doesn't mean that whatever level you are in, now you're there and the rest go away. They're still there. The mind is still fabricating its concept of God. It can't help but do that. Even you just say the word, boom, the mind has got a place to put that
Mm-hmm.
in its referential library
Mm-hmm.
of concepts, and in this case, of religious concepts. And then, just like the word good and bad, as soon as you say good or bad to someone, they've got a place to put what is meant by that. But a man number 4 sees good and bad differently than a man number 1, 2, or 3. Man number 5 sees good and bad differently. So, but all these levels can be there. This is part of God is everything. So it's not as though you dispense with a lower, it's that you see through it. You see it as the limitation of that level of consciousness in yourself. And you're not then held in abeyance.
Mm-hmm.
You're no longer restricted to that or by that. You transcend it. Just as the same with the idea of the ego, that the ego doesn't really exist. It's like a concept, a psychological
Give it.
concept in us, and you see through it. And when you see through it, you rise above it. It's not like an object that exists and now you kill it and you break it apart and it goes away. No, it wasn't. It was just a psychological phenomenon to begin with. And then you see that. This is the idea of seeing the illusion. And a consciousness sees the illusion. And by virtue of seeing the illusion, realizes itself even more deeply. And that this can continue. That this continues, this doesn't stop. There is more, let's say there are higher levels of illusions to transcend in ourselves and to see through and to keep rising above, to keep transcending. And ideally, not ideally, theoretically, God is the ultimate of this. It is the ultimate of the self-realization of conscious awareness at its most full, which is endless. It's not, you never reach full saturation because it's endless. But anyhow, just that it's, again, the mind thinks, okay, I'm going to get rid of my idea of God on this level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to get rid of it and I'm going to move to the next level. It doesn't work. See, the mind, this is the mind thinking about how it could go to higher levels of being. And the mind doesn't go to higher levels of being.
Mm-hmm.
Only consciousness, awareness does. It's the only thing capable of transcending.
Wanted to maybe touch on this from the fourth way point of view, religion, yeah, and exoteric and esoteric. I think it's important, especially as we are going to go later in further talks about looking at some scriptures. So in the fourth way, the idea is that there's some sage or an awakened man or woman, conscious, fully conscious being, and then they are having a relationship and teaching with the people around them, the disciples, the students, and there is like a live, direct encounter between the sage and the students who are interested in it. And there is this, the teaching, the practices, the being, the transmission, so that this interaction has the role of what Gurdjieff would call a C influence, that acts as a conscious influence. It will help Peter and James and all of that to become more conscious. Yeah, so that's what we call influence. Conscious influence comes from a very conscious place, and it is direct and has the effect to create more consciousness, more conscious awareness into the recipient, and it is usually oral or live. Even if it's in a psychic world or in between worlds, it's kind of direct, immediate. So now what in the fourth way, the idea is that now that master, the sage, finishes here, dies, and they are just some of his students, and even if some of them have become sages themselves, some more time passes and they are just the writings and the translations and the additions, and it becomes now an organization, and it becomes an organization, and a few hundred years pass. So there's still some, the core, maybe there is still some of the hints of the teaching. There is still a little bit of a hints or a scent of the truth of the master, but it can become so twisted up in knots that it becomes what is called in the fourth way B influence. So yes, it came from the master, from Jesus, from Lao Tzu, from whoever it came, but a lot of things happen, and as they said, one of the teachers, the dead gurus, dead teachers can't kick ass. You're not there to say, dude, that's not what I said. You are totally off point and you are twisting my teaching. So it becomes this B influence, conscious in origin and mechanical in its manifestations, and it is thrown into the usual life values, and it becomes religion, basically, religion, and it can have very little to do with the actual truth of what the prophet or messenger of God or had something quite little to do with it. They varies, and also it does have sometimes a civilizing effect. So due to, let's say, Christianity, although there are so many people have been killed and tortured in the name of Jesus, and so much twisted, evil, unconscious things have done in the name of religion, it can be said it did have some civilizing effect in a way that on society. So it has a slightly uplifting effect on society, unless there are phases in the octave of the religion when it gets really dark and ignorant, like in the Inquisition or as such things. So that religion, that will be exoteric. Basically, the teaching, the conscious teaching of the master is interpreted by people who are unconscious, and they distort it. And then they look at it as a God out there, and some behavior, good behavior, and some reward, and all of that. And that's exoteric, outer meaning. And then there is this esoteric, is more like the actual, what happened between Jesus and his disciples, or Ramana and his students, or this direct, immediate, or the people who are receiving this, let's say the people who are receiving the teaching that are already at a more conscious level of being, and then they sense, or they are trained in a school to know that, hey, there's a secret meaning here. It's not literal. It's not literal. And then one can still extract the jewels from that teaching that became a religion.
It's interesting. The image that came to my mind for the first time, but it came from listening to you, is that it was the image of there being this beautiful perfume, and this representing what you were referring to earlier as C influence, or truth, direct transmission of truth, of reality, etc. Like this very fine perfume, sweet perfume. And now it gets put onto a piece of clothing, let's say a scarf, a garment. And now it's in the garment, this scent of the perfume. But what happens with religion is it now becomes all about the scarf. It becomes all about the garment.
Mm.
And initially, you could say, you can still smell the perfume's still distinct. And you can recognize it's more than the garment. It's this scent in the garment that has been soaked into the garment. But over time, that scent begins to fade. It gets so soaked into the garment. And now the religion becomes all about the garment, all about the form, all about the behavior, the morality, the rules,
Mhm.
the ceremonies, the costumes, etc. It becomes all about visible form, and the original perfume, the essence that permeated it, is lost and forgotten about.
Mhm.
And that when a conscious teacher teaches, they're teaching, and they're using even the garment to teach. They are saying, remember, here, come closer, get a scent of this perfume. That's what I'm really talking about.
Mhm.
That's what we're really talking about, this perfume, this essence of being, this consciousness of being. And it's not about the fourth way system or about a non-dual teaching or about a Tibetan tradition or a certain religious book. Or no, it's all of those are like these garments, these scarves, and but it's really about this original, sweet, ungraspable by the mind and body perfume.
Yeah, I love this image. Yeah. And then, the whole line of clothing, the made 300 years later, like to make exactly with the same kind of thread that the master had. This is it. This is the teaching. Don't change it. And then some other faction comes and they say, no, no, the sleeves, we can have the sleeves like that. And it becomes a whole different thing with the sleeves, but the perfume is.
Yes, and even too, there's a very popular notion, and people put a lot of stock in this, and that is, if you didn't get a scarf handed down to you from somebody else who had that particular scarf, yes, or if you didn't get a new scarf made out of some of the fabric of that old scarf, then you're not uh, you're not quite getting it, or you're not quite legit, or you're off the track, and and that's not true. What's true, what's important, what's real is this perfume of consciousness, of awareness. And that is not transmitted through form. It can be conveyed as concept through form, through different forms, but it itself is not transmitted. Even though, I mean, using this analogy, stretching it a little bit, you can pick up a teaching, a methodology, a practice, or something like that, and you can kind of, and you get, oh, yes. Oh, it's about that. Oh, okay. It's not about me doing my yoga and holding this posture for 60 seconds without and breathing right. No, it's about the presence that it evokes in me. Yes. Same with meditation. Same with a prayer. Oh, I see now. It's not about repeating the prayer and getting it right all the time. It's about now there's something, the genie's starting to come out of that particular bottle.
Yeah, but that person that has this, oh, I see. It gets the distant perfume activated in them. They need to have the perfume already to some degree because people doing all of this, in my experience, if I'm really honest, if people are really honest, for a long time we engage in teachings and practices in a remedial way, as Adida would say, remedy, like as a consolation, as a soothing, as a feel better, as a escaping, as a not wanting to feel this. It's like as a lollipop of the ego. The ego is suffering. The false personality setting is suffering itself, and thinks that if it licks this lollipop that is be influenced or does something, it's going to feel better. And true spiritual practice, true spiritual life seems to start much later. However, we need to start somewhere, so there starts to interest, love of something, putting effort.
I think it's true to say too that true works of art, forms, let's call them, in the arts or in literature or even in things like dance, that if they came from this, if they contained at their origin this perfume, they do continue to carry like an extract of it through time, through history, through the history of humanity. And this is why you can pick up the Bhagavad Gita or read one of the Gospels and intuit it the right way. It's still there, that perfume. It's beyond the form that you see. But these were intended as vehicles to carry this truth, this perfume of truth about consciousness, about awareness, through time, through history, for the purpose that people could, as you said, you do need to have a real taste of it. You need to have it. And so it's like all of these things I'm talking about, it can be a book, it can be a song, it can be a picture, a painting, it can be a piece of architecture. In some instances, and it's like you can take off the cap and some of it you get it. It touches the consciousness in you. The seed of consciousness in you is nourished by that.
I guess religion number one, if we finish the initial idea, we wanted to explain, make it more precise. So man number one, there's the physical man in the fourth way, the center of gravity is, so it's asleep from the spiritual point of view, not aware of oneself, not aware of what's true identity. It's mechanical, asleep, stimulus response. Center of gravity is in the moving instinctive center. It's a physical man, body-based, matter, what's real, this or that. What I see in doubting Thomas, maybe he was man number one, I don't know. But when Jesus showed up as a spirit after the, anyway, this is, just go with me. Thomas, Thomas was like, oh, I can't believe I need to touch it. I need to touch it. Can I put there's a Caravaggio painting where Thomas sticks his finger in Jesus's wound and then he believes. Yeah, so needing to see, to touch, to taste, to believe. So religion number one is connected to ritual and not a lot of understanding, not a lot of philosophy, not a lot of intellect, maybe not even a lot of feeling or heart. It's some kind of ritual. And it can be beautiful ritual. I somehow was raised in this, and I remember in the Greek Orthodox, the churches are beautiful. They are beautiful. It's not like how it is in other countries or in America here. It's like old and the icons and the incense and the stained glass and the this and there's a certain rich atmosphere and people come, and my grandma and everybody taught me, hey, you come there, take off this thing, cross 3 times, and then you go to this icon on the right, you cross 3 times and then kiss the icon, and you go there and you cross 3 times and you do this and you do that and don't do this and don't do that. And it was interesting. You can see people coming on the church door outside, and they change, and then they go into this kind of the protocol. I'm going to go do this protocol and kiss the right thing and do this or that with some contrite. There is some kind of, maybe it's a moving center posture that has this religious thing, and they kiss the right thing and the right protocol, and then that's it. Then you go. So that's in the whole, there is that's religion number one, with the protocol, with the right, with the right things like that. This can be in all religions like that, just the form and the mechanics of it. The religion number two was the emotional centered man. It's more like the emotional centered man that is asleep. It's about emotional life and relational, and is in a world of relational Jews, so to say. So religion number one, I guess, is much more emotional, and then, but due to the low level of consciousness, so to say, of the people, it can become fanatical, it can become antagonistic, it can become righteous, it can become like a Queen of Hearts religion, Jack of Hearts religion, Queen of Hearts, as we call it, like the emotional part of the emotional center, where we are really right and they are really wrong, and we have to teach them a lesson, and this is what God wants us to do. So there's a lot of emotion that fuels some type of ignorance, and can be very harmful in some way. So some idea of religion number two, it's more like deep feelings about an external God. And then there's the religion number three, which will be for the intellectual centered man, that is very much his conscious. It's basically it's a lot of concepts, ideas, theories, science. So here you may have deep philosophy about God, or you may have the study of the Bible and having a deep analysis of how many times this word appeared 300 times here, and how it presented there, and making a certain point and approving, and maybe there's a scholarly approach to it.
I think we could say that kind of a summary of it is that the religion of man number one is based on the idea of obedience. It's behavioral obedience, like you were talking about protocol and ritual, repetition, doing it right, and it's about obedience. And the religion number two, the emotional form, is more devotional. It's not so much about obedience, it's devotion, proper devotion. And religion number three is literal. And it's about understanding, like you say, the scholarly, going in all this in an analytical detail. And these are all right, because this is different, what I call centers of gravity in people. In some people, their instinctive moving center is predominant. They relate to obedience when it comes to religion and ritual. And people who are emotionally centered, they relate to doing good to your fellow man and to devotion to God. Prayer, a lot of prayer. And then intellectually centered people who think conceptually and about ideas and about facts and about proofs, they're interested in the analysis and getting it right. And is this cloth actually the one that was the shroud that Jesus wore in the tomb? And is this really Noah's Ark we found out here in the desert? And what's the exact dates and all this? And they're appropriate for these centers of gravity. They're all limited, they're all narrow, they're all conceptual based.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you said something before that stayed with me, that all of these notions or concepts or forms of God, forms of imagined God, or forms of religious practice, we have them all on top of each other, even if we transcend them. So I went to Romania a few months ago, Bucharest. There was an old church, very old church that, I thought, oh, I'm just going to check it out. I haven't been there for a long time. I used to be a student there. So I just go into this church. My understanding of God and of the self changed a lot since I was a kid, and going to church, I sit there. There are these Orthodox monks singing on the tape. I don't know. I just comes to me to cross, and then it's deep. I'm just deep. Suddenly have this deep emotion and tears and crying and like it was so sweet and so beautiful and the icons and the but there was all of energy and it wasn't that I reverted back to that. I never had that as a just a regular Christian Orthodox thing. I never had that. So there was a whole mystical, non-dual experience with a strong Greek Orthodox flavor. I loved it, you know? It was wonderful. Yeah. So what is a religion for man number four? Who is basically man number four is a more balanced man. It's somehow consciousness is a little bit more aware, more awake, and it's a primary focus. A mature man number four, as far as I grokked it, it's priority and its orientation in life is the needle is on conscious evolution. That's the most important thing. Everything else is secondary. And there's already some results, more purification, more cleaned up, more less wrong work of centers, more the machine getting more something more balanced. Yeah, what would be your understanding of a religion for man number four in the fourth way, so to say, I guess?
I would say that men number four is still governed by their center of gravity also. And so you would still see examples of religion, of ritual and obedience. This idea of just being obedient to the requirements of a school, for instance, or school, what are called school rules in the fourth way, and the guidance of the teacher, the advice of the teacher, and following all the protocols. And doing that religiously is an expression you often hear. He did it, she did it religiously, meaning, so someone who would be instinctively centered, moving centered, they'd be, very obedient and very consistent and very
Yeah, well,
ritual based.
he said this in 1999 in that meeting.
Yep. And show up and complete all your projects that you're asked to do and this kind of thing. And then emotionally centered people who are men number four, nevertheless governed by their emotional center, they're more into the social aspects of being in a school, let's say, and also trying to help other people. But it's well-meaning, but it's still being governed by the emotional center. And the view of it is they're seeing it through the emotional center. And then intellectually centered people more about, the ideas and making sure information is conveyed correctly and accurately, and maybe some research being done about the history of the teaching and all these things. So it still comes into play through the center of gravity, but the focus, as you say, the needle, it's all geared toward this idea of higher consciousness, achieving, reaching, evoking higher consciousness in oneself. But doing so, of course, inevitably through one's center of gravity, because that is how we are. That's how we're made. We're built. We don't choose that about ourselves. And so, whereas men number 1, 2, and 3, again, this idea that God is outside of them and that they're doing these things in order to appeal to or to obey or to understand this God. Whereas men number 4, you could say their God is consciousness, the possibility of this higher consciousness in them realizing itself. That becomes their God, if you will.
They are dedicated,
Mhm.
dedicated and committed
Mhm.
fully or as fully as possible to the aim of awakening, huh?
Yes.
Work. It's religion is they are committed to the work.
And it is artificial. You see, then God the concept of God is being replaced by this idea of potential awakening. Just like a school is also artificial, it's an artificial environment, but it's created for the purpose of sharpening this focus toward awakening in oneself. And so it's like a cocoon. It's fabricated for the purpose of creating something else, of making possible a transformation. But it has to be put together in such a way, and the operations inside of it have to happen a certain way for that to occur. And so this is the religion of man number 4, is participating in that cocoon, in that process, and but inevitably doing so through your center of gravity.
It's interesting. It came to me as this came that the religion number 4 would be the devotion to the work and to the aim for awakening. And I could see that Gurdjieff did that. He would say people, hey, make your aim your God. Write down your small aim, put it in your pocket. Doesn't matter what Jesus said, any of this, just this is your aim, your God. Wanted to shift from the God praying out there, an imagined parental figure at the edge of the universe, to kind of bring all of these energies towards something that will help, will grow, will go somewhere. So we had a little bio break, and then we forgot to record. And it often happens with us. We go into some deep talks about that, but also I'm aware of the timing, and so yeah, I think we can pause this talk here, and we both of us want to continue. And we are actually, I'm very inspired, and I see new connections being made, and to continue with this topic and other side topics. This is a big topic, an important topic, and maybe we'll continue with the man number 5, or the beginning of awakening perspective on the divine and the ray of creation, and so on. We are going at some point to go into actually looking at some of these objective arts. It's the objective art as the Bible or the Gospel of Thomas, or some of these things that have came in the Christian tradition with the intention to bringing certain higher understanding to it. Maybe the perfume, the essential oil will come out of the frozen pages. I mean, I'm sure that will happen. Yeah, and my intention is not to attack anybody's religion, or to, my intention is to somehow, it seemed like it was necessary for Gurdjieff to, in order to have a real positive impact on raising the level of consciousness of humanity at that time, and of these groups, to teach in a certain way, and I can see the genius of it. And I personally would like to bring somehow God a little bit back more into the 4th way, but without going into some distorted mental made God. And also I'll share more certain experience I had, I kind of realized certain limitations if stay just at the level of this just awareness, and so my intention is, this is my intention, and stay tuned. Looking forward to share this with you, and if there are any questions on this, feel free to send us or make a comment here. All right, Peter?
All right. Thank you, Mihai.
Thank you.
Let me know when you want to reconvene.